Welcome to New Rechts, or for our English listeners, New Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and I'm happy here to talk to Katalin Deme. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you too.
And today we're going to talk about culture, and specifically how the European Union uses culture to push its own political agendas. And I'm not for nothing talking to you about this because you recently wrote a report for the think tank MCC Brussels about a specific topic called the jargon of diversity, how the EU co-opts culture to push its agendas. And for those that don't know you, you're also a senior fellow at MCC Brussels. And I actually saw that you focus on quite some topics, but I would say one of the things that stood out to me was that you focus on expanding the academic network and promoting events in the field of history, memory, culture, and arts. So these are, you could say collectively, at least these are things that seem to be forgotten more and more. So I want to start with a personal question, and it is, we're going to talk a lot about culture, but nowadays people have many different definitions of culture. So what does culture actually mean to you when we speak about culture?
Thank you, Daniel, for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you. And you know, such a question, this is a metaphysic question, a very complicated question, but I will narrow it down to my life story. I was born to a Hungarian minority in Czechoslovakia. So I observed the world always from the perspective of a minority. And as for a Hungarian from Czechoslovakia, culture meant for me basically three things. The first thing was distinction and identity. Why? Because as an Hungarian, I always needed to explain myself through culture, through history, through belonging. So it was something distinguishing. I was always different. So culture was very much connected to identity, very strongly in my case, but also to another phenomenon, which is resistance. Imagine that I am now so old that I was socialized before 89 under the socialism, the state socialism. I wouldn't use the expression communism because it is very Americanized. It is not precise. I lived under state socialism. And in this regime, culture, it was really a kind of of resistance. Maybe you have heard about the author Milan Kundera, who was world famous. He wrote in French mostly. And Milan Kundera, he expressed himself in the 1970s on the following way. After his opinion, culture is the sanctuary of small nations. Why? Because small nations, they're all the time occupied by great powers. They can't really resist, with weapons, with strength. So they resist culture, they preserve their culture. This is their way of resistance. So these are the three most important points for me, what culture in my life represents. This is identity and distinction. And this is resistance. And there is a fourth factor. Here comes my grandmother in the image. This is the way how my grandmother worshipped beauty and culture. I learned that from her. So this is the very personal aspect. That culture for me, it is always linked to beauty.
I think that's a beautiful insight also to how personal culture is. I think a lot of people fall into the pit of talking about culture in a very abstract way, a very impersonal way, as if it's only some intellectual endeavor. And I think that also disconnects many people who might not feel as close to this approach. I can imagine with your personal background that this always sparked some interest in culture. But what was the moment that you decided, I need to do more when it comes to culture?
Well, I would turn the question, or I would modify the question a bit, because, I never thought about culture as such, you know, and my interest wasn't in culture as such, but my interest was rather in cultural representations. This is something what fascinated me. That's why during my career and studies also, I I was very occupied with museums, with museum work. I was employed in 4 different museums, mostly cultural historical museums. 3 of them were Jewish museums in Central Europe. So for me, culture, it was always this imagery, entanglement, the l'histoire croisée. So, and that's of course also my cultural background, because culture is really a mirror, a kaleidoscope. Culture is no, the culture is not, can't be homogeneous. And because I was born in Central Europe, you know, this is very important when you speak with a Hungarian, not to say that we are Eastern Europeans. It was always the Hungarian ethos also before 89 that we are Central European. And what is Central Europe culturally? In Central Europe, you have double, triple identities. You speak several languages. And this is not the modern comprehension of multiculturality. This is the authentic, the really historical multiculturality of the region. So I was raised in Central Europe, so Hungarian. The family was Hungarian, but I was surrounded by Czech, Slovak culture, and of course German culture. So just to answer on your questions, I can't remember the first moment, you know, when I decided that now I will occupy with culture. But I was always interested in this magic, in the cultural representations, in the mirroring of culture.
And that's a fair distinction, I would say. And now let's transition a little bit towards what people think of culture. And I assume that in dealing with these kind of topics, you talk to a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives on culture. What do you think is a big misconception, or maybe even the biggest misconception that people have when it comes to what culture actually is?
Well, I see maybe 2 big misconceptions in the present, contemporary, how culture is used or defined. The first misconception is that culture is something you can utilize, you can streamline, you can control, you can give as a medicine to find solutions on social problems. So in this case, culture loses its authenticity, you know, its true nature. So you can't command culture, you can't control culture. Culture is really a free unity. The other misconception I see in the understanding of culture, in the contemporary understanding of culture, is the belief that you can change people's cultural habits, cultural traditions overnight, within one generation. You can invite people from very different culture to Europe, and by giving them all the opportunities to be integrated, they will change their cultural way of communication, their way of perception of the world around them, their way of comprehending what society is. This is a very tragical, a great misconception of culture, because culture is not just high culture. The culture is also how you treat women, how you understand family, how you relate to the state. You can't change it, because these are traditions, cultural traditions transmitted through generations, hundreds of years. So you will need hundreds and hundreds of other years, you know, to change them eventually. And I don't even believe in that, because maybe in 100 years there will come a special political, historical situation, and suddenly the past, the old culture will come back and revive.
Those are, I think, 2 big points. To just ask you about your first point first, where you say you can basically not instrumentalize culture for some purpose. But as we're going to talk about, it is actually being done. Especially, we're going to talk about today about the way the European Union does it. So you could say that if there would be no use to it, people would not try, right? There is some impact and some influence even. So does that not, in some sense at least, counteracts this point that you cannot, influence culture in this way?
Well, of course, you can influence. Culture has been on a political plan, on a political level, always a very important tool of soft diplomacy. And we shouldn't be naive. Culture has always been politicized, always in the past, and will always be. The difference is, and of course, culture has always been a tool for political regimes, great powers to legitimize themselves. The difference is that mainly in authoritarian regimes, culture is not serving to unite society, to create social cultural cohesion, but to divide society. This is really a strategy. And as we can see it now, culture, as the EU is practicing it, divides us, even though the EU is using the slogan that we should be united in diversity. We are not united. Culture, as before 1989 under the socialism, culture divides society to those who are conform to the definition of state culture and those who oppose it or just don't want to accept it, don't want to practice it. And since we have a very strong state again, like before 89, the state has the funds, the cultural fundings. So people have the pragmatic interest to be conform also on the level of cultural production. And this is a very dangerous phenomenon. So just to answer again your question, yes, of course, the state can use culture as a tool to influence society.
That's a very good point. And, one of the things that I often hear is, why should people care so much about what's happening in Brussels? It's very far away from the national politics that every country has. Okay, there might be things people dislike more and more about the European Union, and for the most part, rightfully so. But why should people specifically care about cultural policy of the European Union when most issues that people care about culturally are issues about national politics? Like, are we going to still be able to use the word Christmas, or do we need to say winter holiday? Or in the Dutch context, can we still use Sinterklaas as a holiday? And every country has its own traditions, etc. So why should there be more attention for what the European Union is doing?
This is an important question, and I return partially to my previous sentences, and I pick up now the definition that culture is a tool of soft diplomacy. But what is soft diplomacy? Soft diplomacy is something you are not realizing really when it happens. It influences you on a nice way, and of course, culture is the tool of our self-expression. It is a bridge to our past, to the previous generations, to our family history. And when we are not really aware of what the EU is doing, when it is funding, for example, the EU is funding cultural projects, archaeology, sounds so good, right? It is very important to open our eyes, to open our ears, to look and to listen what's happening behind the scene. Because what the EU is doing is in silence cutting our roots. And we don't realize it really. And what the EU is doing by way of cultural policy is a dangerous phenomenon, because the EU is starting to speak with our own voice. We think that the EU understands us. The EU knows what is good for us. The EU knows what is the better way, the best way to express us. The EU know how much we should open us for the others, how much we should modify our customs and traditions. So this is something what is maybe even more dangerous as being sent to prison, for your opinions, because this is a direct confrontation. But I am very sensitive on this phenomenon because I was used to it before 89. The socialist state also used popular culture, films, festivals, song festivals, to come closer to the people, to come so close to the people that by the end, you couldn't really differentiate where the state, the oppressor is, and where society is. So it was a kind of changing masks, And when we arrive at this stage that the EU has our own face, and we don't know where the EU is and where we are, where our own culture is, and the EU's definition of own culture, then we are in a way lost.
That's a good point. So now let's dive a little bit into what the European Union actually is doing. You write that the motto of the European Union when it comes to culture used to be unity and diversity, and of course we have many different cultures and traditions and even histories within Europe. Of course, we also have things that we have in common, but also things that are very distinct. So maybe to actually understand what's going on now, you can discuss and tell our listeners how this original message, how this actually was changed and what it actually now became and what it's now used for.
This very metaphysical slogan and controversial slogan, unity in diversity, appeared around 2000. So it is not new. But it became really being used some 10 years ago. And I was also thinking about what was the reason, to create this slogan. So I went back in time to 2000, 2002, 3, and 4. And my explanation is that this slogan prepared, in a way, the assumption of new EU countries to the EU in 2004 and 2007. In 2004, 10 previous the East Central European countries entered the EU. And then 3 years later, in 2007, Romania and Bulgaria, 2 more. And of course, the EU needed to prepare on a new definition of diversity and Europeanness. The EU was also, in a way, very much concerned maybe about the import of nationalism, of ethnical tensions, from the previous East Bloc countries. So it started to prepare on a discursive level, at least already by the beginning of 2000, how to define diversity. Now, if we progress in time and we still have, the slogan unity and diversity before our eyes, in our minds, then try to think about what happened since this time. The EU was enlarged in 2004 and 2007, but then just one crisis after the other went. It started by the migration crisis in 2015. It is still going on. Then came the Brexit vote in 2016. Then we had the COVID epidemic, the COVID crisis. And of course, not to mention the Russian-Ukrainian war. So this is one crisis after the other changed the EU's self-understanding. It changed demographies. It changed the cultural map of Europe. It changed the historical self-understanding of Europe. So this slogan is an interesting phenomenon to analyze. And just to narrow it down on one person, we all know it is Ursula von der Leyen, who became the president of the European Commission in 2019. So she has been there for a long time. Ursula von der Leyen really likes this slogan. And I was also thinking about what is the reason why von der Leyen thinks that this is a very good operative tool. So I see one personal reason. Ursula von der Leyen, she was born in Brussels. She is a true cosmopolitan. She's German, but all her life she was a cosmopolitan. So she is a Brusselian. And Ursula von der Leyen is also Lutheran, right? And we shouldn't really neglect religion, even if it is subconscious, even Ursula von der Leyen is maybe not religious. I don't know how she thinks, how she feels. That's her private affair. But what is the fundamental principle of Lutheranism? In Lutheranism, sins are forgiven. God forgives your sins. You don't need repentance, you don't need to do anything. And it implies also an attitude, towards welcoming different people to the European Union, not giving them any strict conditions, not telling them that they should adapt. You are welcoming them. And Angela Merkel did it also from many other very complicated economical and political reasons. I don't want to make it so simple, but she's also Lutheran. Angela Merkel is also Lutheran. So, you have this cultural, and we speak about culture, these culture's models, the values you are receiving from the family, from the previous generations. You have them in yourself. So I think that that even though Ursula von der Leyen, she manipulates, of course, this slogan. It is very clear what she is using it for, but there are also some cultural reasons behind.
That's definitely an important point. I think you summarize it in your report also very well when you say that there's, with all these crises going on in Europe, there is this also crisis of legitimacy, right? Of what is actually the purpose of the European Union, and this has clearly changed over time from over the last few decades. So are you worried that we're going to see, especially with a lot of these crises still going on, like you said, for example, about the migration crisis, that this cultural agenda will only be used increasingly more? Are there any real signs that we can see of this being pushed more in the upcoming years?
You are right in your observation that that culture is being used more strategically when there is a crisis of legitimacy. Because if I may use a metaphor, and I hope that that your auditors and viewers will understand it, culture is used today, nowadays, as a Potemkin village. It is a facade. You have a facade, and culture is about brotherhood, sisterhood, understanding, opening our hearts, about slogans. And if you imagine, for example, secularized Westerners and newly arrived Muslims from third world countries, they can be brothers and sisters on the stage, in a theater, in a festival, within a huge cultural project financed by millions and millions of euros. It is possible to stage it. It is a game. But in reality, when culture when culture departs, from the big scenario of theaters and the cultural projects, and it reappears on the streets in our everyday life. So it is much, much more difficult to control it. And this is what the EU wants to disguise, by spending so much money, really, really high amounts, millions and billions on culture. It is just a game. It is a disguise to cover reality.
And when you say there's a lot of money being spent, like what kind of numbers should we be thinking about, and what kind of programs are used to push this?
I was working a lot with different cultural fundings, and it was a tough work for me to read through their language, and to understand their logic. So I'm not going to tire your viewers with details, but I would pick up two controversial and really huge cultural fundings. The one is the Creative Europe program, which was established more than 10 years ago in 2014. So this is kind of, if you imagine a ship, you have these galleon figures on the ship, it is normally a female figure. So this is the galleon figure of the EU's cultural funding. The Creative Europe receives every 5 years a certain amount, and the last amount for a 5 years period, it was about 2.5 billions of euro. So imagine 2.5 billions of euro on very strange cultural programs. But let's confront it with another cultural program. It is the Asylum and Migration Funding. Very easy as a title. But believe me, this is also a cultural funding program, which mission is to enhance intercultural dialogue and the cultural integration of migrants and refugees from Muslim countries. This program has a budget, a 5 years budget of 7.8 billion euro. So compare it with the greatest cultural funding program, the Creative Europe, which has a budget on 2.5 billion euro. And this one is almost 3 times so high. So if you think about the spending on cultural nihilism, because this program will never have success, they will never impact positively society, and they will never impact positively integration. So what a Potemkin village is the European Union's cultural funding.
Yes, I do agree, and I think more and more people are waking up to this. I'm curious what you think that the consequences will be as this is failing, as you said yourself. What we see now in Europe, of course, some counter movements going on when it comes to cultural identity of nations. You mentioned, of course, that you're Hungarian. Hungary is one of those countries that is getting a lot of flack from the European Union for this alternative view on culture compared to what we discuss now, which is dominant in the European Union. What do you think we can expect when, first of all, we have these clashes of these two different views, and second of all, I think also important for people to make it concrete. What does it mean for people themselves, and what do you think people can actually do to contribute to this alternative vision?
The answer is long. I will try to be clear and concrete. So if I want to be concrete, I need to start with my work and our work at MCC Brussels. Just to present ourselves to our viewers, MCC Brussels is really an international tree. So we are so intercultural and multicultural as you can imagine. We are Hungarians, we are British, we are German, French, Irish, Polish, Flemish. So we are really, really intercultural. And it is interesting also psychologically and cultural anthropologically how we communicate with our different cultural backgrounds, how we discuss not just politics, but also how we discuss complex phenomena when we organize conferences and debate evenings. For example, how we discuss the role of classical music, the problem of reading, the phenomenon of beauty, how we discuss memory politics of the past. Imagine how fascinating and interesting it is when a Hungarian asks me discuss these questions with my British colleague on the beginning of the day, and in the afternoon I do it and I'm discussing it with my French colleague or Flemish colleague or Polish colleague. All of them, they have a slightly different understanding what beauty is, what culture is, or what politics is about. We have different temperaments, we have different associations, so our cultural backgrounds are really different. And at the same time, it is functioning wonderfully. So if I could propose, to re-establish the EU, I would propose the model of MCC Brussels as a mini microscopic European Union as a proof of that, yes, intercultural communication, yes, it can function if you just accept that you can't understand everything, you can't translate everything. So it was just a bit an introduction to your questions. What will happen if the EU's cultural policy fails? What should we do? To make it succeed? Well, if we first answer the negative question, the pessimistic question about the failure of this cultural policy, well, what can I say? If this cultural policy continues on this way as it exists today, by the end, nobody will feel home in the EU. And you see this paradox, the whole ideology, all these slogans are about integration, feel that you are welcome, you should be yourself, feel home. And by the end, there is no home anymore, because we have no roots anymore. We don't know where we are coming from. What can we offer to the new European citizens? So this is a very sad scenario. But if we look like in the life of Brian on the right side of the life, and we smile even on the crucifix in this very difficult situation, and we reflect about what should we do. So what should we do? Let's come back to our cultural heritage, right? We didn't touch yet the question of cultural heritage. Let's come back to our origins. Let's remember what our grandparents told us about the past, about their way of understanding culture. So I was thinking, that it is so important not being ashamed of the principle that culture and cultural heritage and cultural memory, and cultural practices, it is always about possession. If you really want to care about culture, then culture is always mine and your culture. And it doesn't mean that I'm looking down to another culture, I'm excluding it. But if I have my culture, I'm caring for this culture. I'm ready to defend it. I'm ready, to promote it. I understand it. And if I may, I will be very short. I just give you a concrete example because it is always good to explain it from through something concrete. Some 15 years ago, a castle, an old historical castle in eastern Slovakia, burned down. It was an accident. But I was really connected to this castle through my childhood, through anecdotes, heard from my grandparents. And when I saw the burning castle on the internet, I was crying. I got tears in my eyes. I thought, oh no, I'm losing something. This is my heritage. You understand? And of course, I was also crying when the Notre Dame burned down, or a part of it, because this is also my heritage. But I don't think that our guests, our new migrants and asylum seekers, they would cry by seeing the burning castle or the burning Notre Dame. So this is, this is the possession. Just come back to the earth, touch it, feel it, and leave the great slogans, about European culture and world culture. We have our national culture, and we need to care about them.
Thank you for that. And one thing you mentioned here about cultural heritage is also something that triggered me that I want to ask you my last question about. It is, as you were saying yourself, I think many people who recognize this, that there is kind of this disconnect with this cultural heritage, like you described also how important that is. But as we already have lost some of this and we might sadly lose more, what way can we actually use to, revive, restore these cultural heritages of all our countries?
Well, we need to know them. We need to come back to history. It starts in the classroom, in teaching, not at the university. When you are at the university, you are already lost, because university is not about history and culture anymore. So it starts in the family, I would say, that you as a parent, you need to explain your child what heritage is, what the memory of your family is, the history of your family. You start there. Then in schools, the teaching of national history would be very, very important, and not the general history, but of national histories. And when we raise a young generation who knows its own history, its own language, its own culture, then they will find a solution. We can't prescribe this solution because it would be a teleology, it would be an utopia. And time will show, history will show. But I think the key is really, these are our children, the youth, the next generation. We need to keep them, and of course we need to work ourselves to do something. But this is a very important duty.
It's a good point. Let's hope together that we can turn things around in Europe. There's a lot of beautiful culture to keep, to restore, to remember. And so I really want to thank you for sharing also your personal touch to the topic of today. Let's say that people want to follow more of your work. Where can they best do that?
I feel very honored about your questions. It is very easy to follow my work within MCC Brussels. You need just to open MCC Brussels website, and you will find my report, my research under the reports. So there's much interesting stuff to read, not just my own work. So I really invite your friends, your public, your audience to do it and just to pick up the issue they are mostly interested in. And I will feel honored if they will read also my writings.
Thank you very much for coming here today.
Thank you too.
And of course, I also want to thank all our listeners. Only because of you, we can make these kind of conversations possible. So if you're not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing at nieuwrechts.nl and on our social media channels. Thank you very much, and I see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.